Welcome to this roundtable here at JP Morgan. Thanks everyone for joining us on this lovely morning here. I just want to get things kicked off with, we'll do some brief introductions of each of the CEOs here, and then we'll get at the questions. So Chris, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm Chris Anzalone. I'm CEO of Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals. We are an RNAi company with programs as diverse as cardiometabolic to hepatitis B to orphan indications.
I'm Daniel de Boer, the founder and the CEO of ProCure Therapeutics. We work on RNA medicines for very severe genetic orphan diseases.
I'm Karol Nikolic. I'm founder and CEO of AlkaHest. We are developing therapies for age-related diseases, particularly neurodegeneration like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, and age-related macular degeneration.
I'm Leslie Williams. I'm founder, president, and CEO of Immuson T. We are developing peptide immunotherapies for autoimmune disease. Our lead indication is in celiac disease.
So good morning. My name is Mark Rotherer. I'm CEO of Orchard Therapeutics, which recently went public. We're a gene therapy company based on ex vivo lentiviral gene therapy technology. We have a leading pipeline with 5 clinical stage assets, 1 commercial asset, and the lead program is for metachromatic leukodystrophy, a very severe genetic disease that has a very short life expectancy, and we're bringing transformative medicines to these patients.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Thomas Ingelbach. I'm president and CEO for Valneva. Valneva is a commercial stage vaccine company dedicated to commercialize and develop vaccines in areas of unmet medical need. Our lead program is the only clinical stage Lyme vaccine program in the world.
Good morning. My name is Ami Aberman. I am chairman and co-CEO of Pluristem Incorporated. We are dealing in the allogeneic cell therapy product. Our lead product is for critical limb ischemia, and the second one for muscle injury, and we are in phase 3 studies.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us here at JP Morgan. And I just want to start out by, obviously, the week ahead of JP Morgan and even the first day of START got off to a big start of last week. We had the announcement of Bristol Myers acquiring Celgene for $74 billion. And then on Monday, Lilly announced its proposed acquisition of Loxo for $8 billion. And so what had been a relatively quiet year for M&A in 2018 is starting off relatively lively. And I just wanted to maybe start off that question in terms of how you see that affecting the year of M&A and how that feeds into, we're going to talk a little bit more about business development, but maybe we can just start with that. And Chris, I'll start with you, but we should feel free to have a discussion anyone wants to.
You know, predicting how a year is going to be for M&A or for business development is folly. So we'll see how that goes. I think that companies that focus on their business and focus on their products and their candidates, are going to succeed if those products are going to work. And so I think people need to focus on bringing these hopefully transformative medicines to patients. And should they be helpful to other companies, then that's going to happen. I think the best thing to do is not to focus on that.
Mm-hmm. And so you actually announced a large deal last year, towards the end of the year, in business development with Janssen for your lead candidate. Maybe we can just talk a little bit as we get this discussion going around business development, sort of what sort of led up to that in terms of the data that you were able to show and bring in that opportunity, because that is something that most everyone at this table it's some aspect of their business is.
Yeah. So on the face of it, it was a little bit silly, right? We had entered the clinic 6 months prior, and then we entered into a partnership with Janssen that was worth $3+ billion, and so I think a lot of that was what we had done upstream of those 6 months of dosing patients. I think that it was important that we had developed for ourselves a leadership position in hepatitis B, and so I think there was a level of scientific trust from Janssen that what we had done in our prior programs was informing what we had done for our new program, and so I think that brought them to the table. And then we presented some data in December of 2017 with our prior program that suggested that RNAi could be a helpful modality for hepatitis B, and so I think that sparked their interest as well. And then they came to the table and started looking at our data, and the data turned out to be quite good. So you never know what is in the mind of a partner, but I think that we had done everything right upstream of that. Again, showing that we were scientific or thought leaders in the field. We went about the development of this, I think, in a methodical way. And then of course the data spoke for themselves. Now we hadn't seen any cures yet, and so it was still a call option. But I think we had checked all the boxes that we needed to check in terms of safety profile, in terms of activity.
Mm-hmm. And from some of the other people here on the panel, I mean, obviously you're working in various disease areas, from orphan indications to larger indications, and some with novel technologies and some more traditional, and just sort of what that level of evidence you have to generate, or what you're sort of thinking about generating. In your biotechs, your budgets aren't huge, so how do you kind of think through that? And Leslie, maybe you can.
Yeah, I think we're developing a peptide immunotherapy in a space where there is currently no treatment available today. So we're blazing the trail on all fronts, from a regulatory front, but also in a new class of drug. And I think M&A doesn't happen overnight. This takes years of ongoing discussions with pharma and getting them comfortable with the science, but the science leads the way. And we have extensive clinical data. What has been fascinating for us is the amount of data that they are looking at from a mechanistic standpoint. So we have clinical data. We've shown that we modulate the immune system, but now it gets to the deeper level of mechanistically, is it expansion of regulatory T cells? Is it, energy? And there's animal data that has been, extensive animal data, and that generally applies, but where we are with a new class of drug, I think they're trying to piece this together because there's no treatment and because this could be game-changing for the field of tolerance induction in an autoimmune disease. So I think the bar is higher. I think the science leads the way. But I think the proof is unfolding, and I think the relationships that have been built over the years, I think M&A is ripe for novel technologies to be partnered with the right companies.
Mm-hmm. Zami, do you have any comments? And sort of, you're working in a new technology area as well, so what are your sort of?
We have a different approach. We would like to build a fully integrated company. We have 175 employees. We have our own manufacturing, and we are in phase 3. So we believe that we don't want to be acquired. Probably we license the product to some partners in some territories where we cannot do it by ourselves. But the strategy is to start to talk about deals after phase 3 data will pop up.
Phase 3.
I would add to that, because I think it is, you don't go and, I think building a fully integrated company is the way I think good science actually gets translated. You don't build a company to partner it. I think it's building a company to advance products and bring products to patients. That is our focus. And if there is synergy, we will be open-minded. But I agree with what you said. You don't go and build a company to partner it or sell.
Probably one comment to that. If you build it to sell it right away, you do shortcuts because you don't want to spend money on the right clinical study design, the right manufacturing, and so on. So the way to do it is to build a company, and if something will happen and somebody will give an offer, that is questionable.
And now Valneva, as you mentioned, you're the most advanced and one of the only companies with a treatment for Lyme disease, and I'm just sort of wondering what that conversation or evidence you have to generate to, understand sort of the unmet need for people, not just for partners, but potential partners, but also investors, and kind of telling your story and what the evidence base looks like to tell that story.
Yeah, so it's an excellent question. So first of all, like you, we are already a fully integrated company. We do everything from research to sales, and the bar is high. I mean, you mentioned that, over the past couple of years, and I've been on both sides of the table, big pharma as well as biotech, pharma can wait. They can wait to get data that is sufficiently predictive for the later effectiveness and efficacy of the drug, or in our case, a vaccine. So we are developing the Lyme disease vaccine till end of phase 2. And then our objective is to enter into, ideally, a co-development structure in order to mitigate risk and in order to share investment costs, but also in order to bring a partner on board that can help commercialize such a vaccine, because we will never, as a small company, have the muscles and the infrastructure to commercialize a vaccine like a Lyme disease vaccine, for example.
Okay, and Mark, you've had some experience in business development but prior to coming to Orchard, but Orchard's also on the other side of that. You're bringing in assets and your commercial assets from pharmas like GSK with Strimvelis. How are you sort of evaluating that in an area like gene therapy where it's competitive but still new?
Well, I must say it was a bit like gold when we saw that GSK decided to close their rare diseases unit and to sell off their assets. And you know, you can wait a long time in your career to find a perfect fit with your portfolio, because we were already in ex vivo gene therapy, and they were closing the unit that included a range of ex vivo gene therapies that fitted perfectly with our portfolio. And with the same view of being fully integrated and global, one of the keys to that is having a sustainable portfolio. I mean, it's tough when you have one product and then a 5-year gap and then there's something else. Whereas now, with the integration of those assets, we have 5 clinical stage programs, 3 of which we're filing in the next 3 years, plus 1 already on the market, and a number behind that. So it was like a leapfrog that was strategically like a perfect fit. So, you know, it doesn't happen every day. Quite often you have to compromise when you're looking to bring in a BD asset that would sort of help your portfolio. But in this case, I think it was a no-brainer. And also the data, even these are orphan diseases, and therefore, you know, the populations are small. But because the effect size are so huge, you can see that even in a smallish number of patients, a dramatic change. And so it was clear from our point of view that there wasn't a risk in that perspective.
No.
Yeah, I think, you know, Alkahest, we are breaking new ground. It's for the first time in history that, you know, humans, we live this long. And, you know, because we live up to 80 or even 90 years, you know, many diseases pop up which, you know, don't exist in our youth. We actually formed a significant partnership very early on, 4 years ago, with Grifols, which is the world's largest plasma processing company. And this was a vital partnership. It's a very synergistic partnership because they collect 35,000 plasma donations a day. And so we were able to analyze these in donors between 18 and 70 years of age. So we actually established an incredible scientific basis of aging. We now know what it means that, you know, proteins actually change in aging. And this allowed us to identify a plasma protein therapeutic mixture, which we are now developing in the clinic. We are in 3 phase 2 studies for neurodegenerative diseases. And we also picked a target from the increasing negative proteins that cause inflammation and tissue damage. And we acquired a compound from Boehringer Ingelheim, which was in phase 2 studies. So I could echo some of the previous wisdom here that indeed, you know, everything is driven by the science. We established a deep scientific basis of understanding aging and age-related diseases. And based on that, we were able to pick the right targets. And we then put this compound into phase 2 studies in age-related macular degeneration, and we just announced positive data. So you have to be very careful, very thoughtful, very methodical. And I would also echo your comment that, you know, pharmaceutical companies now want to have mechanistic data. So, you know, even though we have positive clinical studies and positive data in age-related macular degeneration, they want to know exactly how we are doing it. We have very good leads, but the bar is very high to actually demonstrate that you're not doing antivascularization or you're doing something that's complementary. So I think that the dream, of course, that we all have is build a fully integrated pharmaceutical company. And one day we may get there, one drug at a time, I think.
Right, and Mark had mentioned about the orphan diseases and a level of evidence, a dramatic effect, and ProCure is in, an orphan indication, and they just had some recent data, and I'm just wondering sort of how you're seeing that play out and what you're hearing from potential partners about the amount of evidence, and also a relatively new modality in that setting.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're a very patient-centric company, which means that for us also decisions on partnering and M&A are driven by what is in the interest of patients. So we think that a deal letting go of one of our assets and partnering with someone else would mostly make sense if someone else has capacities to do something better to that program than we can do. Outside of that, we are working in the orphan disease space, which means that from a commercial perspective, all of that's pretty feasible. Development paths are pretty overseeable and fundable. It's not very expensive to develop an orphan drug compared to some of the, let's say, age-related diseases. So we think that with the pipeline that we have established across the 15 or so programs that we have, we can develop a significant part of those independently. And I think I want to echo what some others said, is that being a thought leader in your space is very important for partnering. So for example, after our recent data in Leber's congenital amaurosis, which is a genetic blindness, so we treated kids and adults that were completely blind, and after one shot of our drug, many of those were able to walk through a room without bumping into objects, and some were able to read again. There's a very significant impact in those patients. We were approached by many companies that actually had ophthalmology assets for similar diseases laying around, and said, you guys clearly know what you're doing with rare genetic diseases in the eye. And that led eventually to us in-licensing a program from Ionis Pharmaceuticals. So we're more looking towards expanding our portfolio and really becoming that leader in the ophthalmology rare genetic space.
May I ask a question about your anti-aging product also? I understand that you're talking about the modality that you will have a few proteins that will be injected to the patient based on the need of some analysis and so. Did you ever thought about an adaptive approach that you can inject cells, in our case, that the cells will change the secretion profile based on the need of the patient? But we have a phase 3 study in a femoral neck fraction, elderly patient, average age is 75 to 85. So.
Absolutely, because we are also about the same size. We now have grown to about 70 employees.
We are 175.
Okay. You win. But I think, clearly you have to be very strategic and very thoughtful about what you do. So far we have focused on the soluble proteins, but your point is a very good one, and I think there is very good solid scientific evidence that indeed, injected cells can drive the production of proteins, and they can counter age-related diseases. I think, the foundational science that we are pursuing came from this discovery that, was brand new, because we have been focused on neurodegenerative diseases, and until, I would say, about 5-7 years ago, there's been a dogma that the blood-brain barrier filters out everything, and so that, proteins that are circulating in plasma will not affect brain function. But this is now broken to some extent, and it's very clear that proteins that circulate in plasma are driving brain function. I would note that all of us here, if we have a pulse of 60, we pump our circulatory system through the body 100,000 times a day. So this is I like to call it the Twitter of the body, right? This is the highway, this is the internet of the body where communication happens. And so we've been kind of focused on the soluble proteins, but I think this could be a next phase, a next step, to look at cellular influences on that.
Maybe I could pick up on a ProQR theme. No, it's interesting when a company is choosing who to sell assets to or partner with. There are a lot of different criteria, and when the GSK deal was announced, or the fact they were closing that division, there were 50 expressions of interest. There were 11 term sheets, and so you think they would have been taken by somebody with very deep pockets who would say, here's a massive upfront payment, and we're going to take those. But to their credit, they had spent 8 years working in this field, and they felt a huge obligation to the patient's community. And they really wanted a safe pair of hands that would be committed to bringing these to patients ultimately. And so it wasn't just about upfront economics. It was really about a belief that the company that's going to take this on will work on that legacy and will do the right thing. And so, unusually for a company of 55 at the time, but we had a profound understanding of this technology, and being a rare disease-focused company, highly patient-centric, they chose to go with a company like us, and one that would be totally focused and committed, along with our current programs that we had at the time, to do the right thing and bring these to patients. So I think there's a variety of factors. It's not just about the data itself per se.
Mm-hmm. And I want to add to, because Chris, you partnered with Janssen. Maybe you can talk about
Actually, I was going to say we had a similar experience. We acquired Roche's entire RNAi business back in 2011, and there were several bidders, as in your situation, and we were the smallest and poorest of all of them. But Roche, had a commitment not only to the technology but also to the people, and we are also committed to the people in the facilities, and we wanted to take all that over and build upon that, and that was an important component of our offer.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a common theme here again, and I think we have been talking just about licensing out and what is the threshold and when can you go to big pharma, but I think the ongoing significant consolidation across the different big pharma players requires them to focus. And when you hear them in their different presentations, they all say the same thing: focus, focus, focus. But focus means that there will be interesting assets, be it clinical stage assets, be it commercial assets, that need to find a harbor in the patient's interest. And I think our capabilities and the strengths that we can show, be it the scientific foundation, but be it also our managerial and leadership foundation that allows us to build integrated companies, will create a new opportunity that is basically, from my point of view, at the rise.
And everyone here is talking about building an integrated company. We are as well.
Yeah.
But there's also, something to be said about the efficient allocation of capital, right? We know what we're good at. We're good at early development, of these programs. But there are certainly other companies that are experienced and quite good at later stage development and certainly commercial launch. And so there is, even for a fully integrated company, there is a place for business development in order to put these assets in the hands of experienced people who can get them to patients more quickly and more efficiently.
Arguably, we're probably the smallest. So we're a private company. We just doubled our team, and we are now 16 in total.
Oh.
So we are very small, and we have been very, very focused. And that has allowed us, and we bring the expertise in our disease area, celiac disease. We are world leaders in this space. And where we are now is really going beyond celiac disease to expanding to the platform. And I think the platform itself, it's articulating the science around our peptide discovery program. We do change the dogma. We don't use animals in our discovery. And all of our work is in patients. And what has been fascinating to us is when we go and talk on a discovery program in autoimmune disease, you talk to the discovery group, they are completely a fish out of water as it relates to talking about patients. It's like, wait, we work with animals. We've got to get our clinical development team. So it's been very fascinating. They don't know what to do. The discovery group in big pharma works in animals. We work in patients during discovery. So it's been a fascinating observation as we've shifted the dogma, and I think that will continue to evolve, and I think the industry is trying to really be more functional and appropriate with patients early on. But it's been fascinating to watch.
comment about the integrated company issues. Years ago, when we started the cell therapy process, we have realized that there is no manufacturing tools to have a decent cell therapy product. And our approach was that first we'll develop the manufacturing tools and means in order to move into the pivotal studies with manufacturing method which can be approved by the agencies for marketing. Look into the CAR-T business, they did it completely opposite. They started with clinical studies and then faced delays because now they're facing the issue of CMC, of manufacturing. So it's a question of strategy. Now, in order to do a fully integrated manufacturing facility that can meet the standard, the FDA and the other agencies, you have to have certain amount of people in R&D, in manufacturing, in QA, in QC, and so on. So you build a company because the quality of the product will define the quality of the clinical studies. And probably one of the reasons that people have been failed in cell therapy in the past because they didn't have the same product injected patient after patient. So you take living cells, have been changed, the cells have been changed because of non-constant manufacturing, and then the clinical outcome is not good enough to suggest that you have new modality in therapeutic. So sometimes it's a necessity. You have to do something new in order to show that the new modalities can be done, not only in the lab, but also in manufacturing.
I want to pick up on something that was started earlier, which is that as pharmas and big biotechs even, they focus, which means programs can fall by the wayside and be up for grabs for smaller biotechs. But it also means that as you're looking for partners, your asset could end up being that one that gets, falls by the wayside. And I'm just wondering, as you evaluate that, how you try to balance the opportunity to get that experience and expertise in late-stage development and commercial with sort of prioritization in their pipeline. I mean, obviously we can't read the future. We don't know what's going to happen in a year to that company, but I'm just wondering how you think through that. I don't know if, Chris, you want to answer that?
You spend a lot of time and headaches in building a program, and you want to make sure that you put it in the hands of somebody who can actually take it forward. So sure, that's from my perspective, that's probably a more important consideration than any upfront consideration because economically, the real benefits happen down the line, and so you're making a bet on that partner that company can take it to patients and can commercialize that properly. So yes, that's an absolute consideration for us. There are only really a handful of companies that had a commitment to hepatitis B, that had or a clear commitment to hepatitis B, and a clear experience in hepatitis B and infectious diseases, and so it was a small universe for us, to consider.
I mean, in our case, because we're uniquely focused on bringing these transformative gene therapies to rare disease populations, and I've spent 20 years now in the rare disease field, it's generally, in my view, that smaller companies do that better, and therefore, the fully integrated approach works, well for rare diseases because you're highly focused. You don't need a massive, organization to do that, and so it would be the exception to consider really partnering something like that out. I think one of the kind of drivers for considering that is if your portfolio has too much for you to handle, and that, in the interest of patients, somebody can actually take some of those programs and move faster because time matters for these patients. But generally, I would say, smaller focused companies do rare diseases better.
I think the other thing, it really depends on the stage of the asset that you're partnering. If it's a commercial stage, does it really round out a portfolio that the large company is already commercializing, and versus is it discovery and it's competing with internal assets that they're developing themselves. So to me, stage has been a really important decision point for us. At what stage does it make sense, if at all, that we partner? And is it the discovery phase for disease areas where we are absolutely not going to develop on our own? And that's how we've really focused our attention on our portfolio, is discovery in areas such as MS and RA, where we know we're too small, and there is there are a handful of companies that own that market. So those are, as you look at life cycle management for those companies, does this fit with their portfolio? That's a discovery collaboration versus, what we have the world's expertise in, which is celiac disease, diabetes, et cetera, in our peptide development, immunotherapy development. We want to make sure that we can deliver treatments to patients. So we are going to maintain that ourselves. If the right partner comes along with a commitment, we would entertain that, but that's not what our plan is.
Probably would like to comment on strategic focus. We are a therapeutic company, but we had to develop a variety of tools, medical device tools, thawing devices, bioreactors, different machinery, in order to enable the manufacturing. So we are not dealing today with licensing our therapeutic product, but we licensed to Chart a month ago one of our equipment, and they will sell it to the market. And we have additional agreements going on, which is not our real asset. There are the tools that we need, or the industry need, the cell therapy industry need, in order to make better product. So we out-license them in order that they will be sold by the expert. They know how to sell medical device. So it's also a question of strategy. What your strategy is, our strategy be therapeutic, manufacture a product because it's an art to know how to manufacture cell therapy product. Think about it that you take a cell, proliferate it, and then cryopreserve it for shelf life is 4 years. And then you have to thaw it, and then to guarantee quality as 4 years ago. It's not an easy task. So in order to do it, you have to control all the ingredients.
I think we're all commenting on the need, the fundamental need for complementation and mutual respect, and you want to have your baby in the right hands. If you kind of out-license or partner with somebody that they will raise that child properly, right? I think this is what we're looking for, and in fact, in our case, early on, we knew that there was a plasma business. That there is this business where factor VIII and immunoglobulins and albumin and other plasma protein components are being sold and manufactured. And this business has become commoditized, right? This has been scaled up. The amount that's processed is remarkable. But now we came in with an entirely new concept and an entirely new platform. We are kind of molecularizing now this knowledge, this science that aging leads to fundamental, profound changes in the makeup of our proteins. And that now opens up an entirely new source of targets, of protein therapeutic candidates that we can pursue. So for us, the relationship with Grifols has been fantastic because it's really also built on this mutual respect and mutual interest, and they see the next phase of the plasma business in this. So I think, for us, this was an important consideration to have a partner who will support this development, and we have been very well funded as under this partnership. So luckily, we'll weather the storm if there is one coming.
Great, that's a good segue in being well funded into the next kind of topic, which is the markets and raising capital, whether it's venture money or public money. And ProCure did a raise towards the end of last year, and now the markets have kind of, I think they're up a little at the start of the year, but they didn't end well last year. And so I'm just kind of wondering, across the board, we have public companies and we have private companies, just sort of how you're evaluating the markets and sort of the ability to raise capital and runway to kind of.
Yeah. Well, you eat cookies when they're served. So when you have good data and when the market is there, you raise the money. We had a pretty unusual corporate financing path. So what we did when we started the company 6 years ago, we started with a friends and family round of mostly biotech people that put together a small round of money. And then instead of doing a Series A with venture capital, we decided to go straight into a crossover round. So our first real financing round was a $60 million crossover round. And then half a year later, we IPO'd on NASDAQ. So we're a Dutch company, but we're listed on NASDAQ. That gave us the capital to really expand the pipeline and go beyond our initial program in cystic fibrosis, go into ophthalmology and CNS and a number of genetic skin diseases, which over the few years after that matured and indeed recently led to some positive data that allowed us to raise another 100 million or so. I think what has been important for us along the way, outside of the, let's say, the capital markets, is the partnerships with patient organizations that can really help to prioritize programs in a pipeline for companies by funding programs and with that elevating them to on the list of the priorities. So for us, partnerships with patient organizations have been an important way to help us prioritize the pipeline, but also an important source of funding.
That's great. And then on the flip side of that, your private company, Valneva, is
Public?
Oh, you're public now. Well, I messed up my notes there. But yeah, so I'm just wondering sort of what your take is on the current market environment and how you're sort of accessing it.
Well, I mean, we raised about $60 million last year in Q3. Also, we are profitable right now. So our commercial business finances entirely our R&D, up to a certain point, of course, namely, up to end of phase 2. And then for the expensive phase 3 developments, we need more money. And our take has been that it is important to show a clear strategic path based on a very solid scientific foundation and a good partnering strategy. And we were able to convince the markets that we believe that the fastest and most efficient way to bring a desperately needed Lyme vaccine to market is to do it ourselves, but together with a corporate partner helping us to finance it, and at the same time share this financing need with the capital markets. So we found a whole variety of so-called US blue chip investors who said, well, we understand the strategy. We help you to build a new shareholder base now. And in 1-2 years from now, once you have your end of phase 2 data, you can IPO the company with a second listing, for example, here in the United States. And we're going to give you the money because we believe that your strategy, how to bring this product to market, is the most efficient and most capital efficient, with possibly the best return on investment.
So we're private, and we're raising a crossover now. So we've raised 83 million to date. Last year we raised 40 million with Arch Ventures coming in and leading that round. So we tapped into JDRF T1D fund to accelerate our T1D program. And where we are now is raising a crossover round of 60 million to really expand the platform. And we're in phase 2, so really in preparation for phase 3. And the interest, surprisingly, and we started late October. So we hit, some really interesting times in the macro environment. But we've been really busy. The appetite is there for good science. And we have a lot of data. So I think this has been a benefit. Anybody that has good programs, good science, good data, the capital's there. And these are with blue chip investors that we're speaking with. So I think it's just presenting the story, the strategy, and having the right team and focusing on the right things has really been positive. Now, proof is in the pudding, so stay tuned. But but we're very optimistic that we'll close this, and then we'll see where that leads us. But it's been very positive.
Sorry, and I think that's the critical point, that the quality assets, quality science, will always attract capital.
I was going to
it may be more expensive at some point, but it will always attract capital.
Probably I would like to give a comment. We raised until now $250 million, $250 million. 2/3 from the market, 1/3 from non-diluting funding, European Horizon 2020, NIH funding, Israeli government funding. So I think that due to the fact that advanced therapies are in the focus of the interest of most of the agencies, countries and so on, there are a lot of non-diluting money in the market. You just have to do the right things in order to get them.
Maybe I could talk to our journey, because we went from private to public last year. And And actually, right at the beginning, non-dilutive funding, for example, a grant from CIRM in California was a $20 million grant, was very helpful to sort of get ourselves up and running. But clearly, as we went into last year and we knew we were approaching the cross line of winning the assets from GSK, the idea of going from 2 clinical stage programs to 5, plus a commercial asset, plus a preclinical pipeline, the step change that we needed in headcount, we're 180 at the end of last year, in funding for manufacturing as well as clinical development and building out a commercial sort of structure, meant that we really had to accelerate funding. So we did 150 million Series C crossover in Q2, and then IPO'd in October. In a tricky market. It was pretty choppy, but I think the point that was made was absolutely right. I think if you go with good programs, solid data, a clear strategy, a good leadership team that have a proven track record, you will find the money and support. So we entered this year with 340 million on the balance sheet. The question now is, as we go forwards, what are those funding sources? And again, I believe that if you do what you say you're going to do, and you deliver on the catalysts that will continue to add value, people will be there to support the company.
And I think that the type of investors you get is important. People say that you get the shareholders that you deserve. And so if you are constantly articulating short-term catalysts, short-term events, then you'll get traders. If you are focused on a longer-term strategy, on a longer-term focus of building value, then you'll have those kind of investors, and those are much easier to build a real company with.
Indeed. I would add, we are still private, and I think what we are learning is that clearly good science and good programs will always be fundable. And what we are operating in is this space which is brand new. This is the first time that we live this long. And these diseases evolved now. We never had a genetic selection against age-related diseases. The population lived much shorter until 150 years ago. Average lifespan was 40 years, and now we live, much, much longer. And this has really truly become or at least one of the major challenges for our generation. To treat, we saw what happens to our parents, we saw what happened to our grandparents, and we want to live a life which is positive, which is healthy as possible. And now the industry has evolved to treat many of these, the various cancers, infectious diseases, even genetic diseases we can now treat. So what we are learning is that indeed there is tremendous interest in this. This is a brand new space, but the money is there. So if you do good science, if you demonstrate your ability to have good scientific concepts and you deliver, the capital will be there.
I would add what we're developing with our peptide immunotherapy, it combines biomarker monitoring. So our selection includes biomarkers, and our monitoring of our clinical effect or efficacy includes biomarkers. So it's big data combined with therapeutics, which is a hot area, and I think the immuno-oncology space has really built this out, but I think where we are now is leading the way in autoimmune disease. And I think that resonates with, it resonates with the regulatory agency, as well as, I think patients. Patients want to make sure that you get the right drug, the right time, the right patient. So I think the whole notion of monitoring with biomarkers and selection with patient selection, so patient stratification. So that has really resonated broadly. And part of this, our clinical development entailed us developing a diagnostic. But we know what we're good at. We're good at therapeutic development. So we have a diagnostic now that we are trying to license because we know what we're good at. And so I think it's out-licensing a diagnostic that could shift the paradigm in celiac disease. And this is the premise in each of our as we expand our platform to other disease areas. But I think diagnostic development is a different beast. Right. So I think that has been something that's been fascinating as you look at how do you position this and build this up to be in a format that can be picked up by a diagnostic developer.
Sure. Yeah, and you know who else likes right drugs to the right patients at the right time? Our payers.
Yes.
And while many sort of a mixed bag on the panel of who's going to commercialize and set the price and partner that, drug pricing is, for better or for worse, the defining issue of the day right now. And I just would like to kind of hear your perspective, particularly from the orphan companies and those that are launching and commercializing on your own, how you're thinking through pricing in the environment we're in. Are you considering novel payment models? Are you looking for partners that are interested in rethinking the drug pricing paradigm? And how much say do you have in that as a potential partner? So I'll start with you.
So sure, I mean, within the big umbrella of pricing generally is the innovation that's coming through from the gene therapy world, where you're talking about one-off treatment changing the course of a patient's life for good. So it is a very different proposition. And up to now, and I've launched 7 orphan drugs globally in the past, we've been talking about chronic treatments, long-term chronic therapy. So I believe the value proposition is extraordinary, and it's made up of a couple of things at least. One, if you take MLD, typically a child will die by the age of 5 in the infantile form. We have data going out to 8 years now saying they're living a normal life. So extrapolate that, and there's no reason to believe it wouldn't continue for the next 40, 50, 60 years and longer. That's extraordinary medical value. You're taking a genetic disease with a short lifespan and giving somebody a normal life. The other part of that equation is actually, if you look at the number of interventions that these sort of patients have, when you look at it, it's something like 2,000 claims over a 5-year period. I mean, there's so many interventions that will no longer be required. So, or at least in the most part. And so I think the first thing is to somehow, with payers and other people involved, talk about what is the intrinsic value of these kind of new medicines? What is that value? And then you can tackle the second problem. How should we pay for that value? And I think there's going to have to be a lot of creative thinking around models for that, because, of course, some payers don't want to have to pay something like that up front totally. They'll want to maybe spread that over a certain period, but they may not be yet, their systems may not be set up for that. So we're intimately involved in dialogues with different institutions, New Digs, Duke Margolis, and others to try and sort of brainstorm around how we have to move the model. But I think if you can start from the beginning by appreciating the value proposition, I think that's a good starting point.
Anyone else? This is obviously.
Yeah, sure. So we are about 2 years away from our first NDA, so we still have some time to think all of this through. But if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture in orphan diseases, we more and more are able to divide what used to be larger indications up into smaller subsets of patients that then each and every one of them qualify as an orphan disease with potential premium pricing. That over time will put a lot of pressure on the system and will potentially lead to a situation where not all of that is sustainable for society. So I think we are really starting to think through how within our pipeline of molecules we can reduce the amount of investment per program that we need to make, such that building on the learnings from one program in the eye, for example, to the next program, to the next 10, to over time drive down the time to market and the cost to market, such that we potentially for a lower price point can still get a very profitable business with a meaningful IRR for the shareholders. Obviously this is pretty far away, but we're starting to think about what that could look like.
I can say that you can't raise capital today if you don't know what your reimbursement strategy is and what your premise is as far as your your value proposition. So we started talking to payers in phase 1. We're in phase 2 now, and this is an ongoing dialogue with payers as well as patients, because celiac disease is not an orphan. It's an underserved market. There's no treatment available. So whatever we bring to the market is additive. So it's it's up to us and in collaboration with the patients to educate the payers the burden of the disease, that both the economic burden as well as the burden from a lifestyle. So I think and the morbidity and mortality. So I think this is an integral part of our daily thinking and plan and strategy. It starts early.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, are private like VCs and whatnot, do they ask you that? Are they interested in that? Yes. Because that's a change from 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we are also private, but we are in phase 2 still, as I mentioned, multiple phase 2 studies. But a commercial strategy needs to be baked into the thinking to what is at the end of the road. And clearly we are doing this internally. This is an internal necessity, but also the investors would like to see that, where are you headed? And so, pricing definitely is a challenging issue. And I find it actually a little bit sad that, the industry has now been blamed for, high drug pricing. Almost every week you read headlines, that there's a pressure on drug pricing. I think one has to distinguish between the adventurous or rogue kind of drug pricing and the ethical drug pricing, which is based on what you described. I think clearly we are working on things that didn't exist before. We are creating new medicines, and when you create something that will be a life changer or a lifetime treatment, one has to be rewarded for that. I recently attended a pharmaceutical executive meeting, and Stelios Papadopoulos, who is the chairman of SG Count, he made a very interesting comment. He said that the challenge is we are socialists. We want to help patients. We want to do good, but we have to succeed in a capitalist environment. And I think that's kind of the challenge here. And but a commercial strategy needs to be in the pipeline very early on.
I would like to add a comment to that. Looking into the industry and responding to what you have said about the criticism on the high prices of drugs, my feeling is that the criticism is because in many drugs, the response rate is low, sometimes 50%. So people are mad on the industry, on the pharma industry, why they're charging when the response rate is 50% or so. So we believe, as you believe, I assume, that you have to guarantee the outcome. So once you have the outcome in place, the reimbursement agency will be more open for new modalities in reimbursement. And I think it's a key for the future, because I don't think that the system will continue to approve drugs, fixed price, regardless of the outcome. They will analyze what is the outcome, what is the response rate, and I assume that in the future the model will be that based on the response to the specific patient, the company will be paid. It's complicated. It's not done yet, but that's the logical step in order to reduce the cost of the system.
And that actually is not something that is coming up a lot more. To be able to do that, you have to be able to track patient outcomes. You have to be able to identify the right patient. It's not just biomarkers. There's phenotypic markers, and there's digital technologies that are emerging, that are being used and tested to enable some of those things. And I'm just kind of wondering if anyone has been dabbling in that or looking at those to
We are looking into it, because think about the clinical study. Today, in our studies, patients come in the first 6 months, every month for follow-up. So we have 6 data points in 6 months. Think about that he can wear a watch, which gives the parameters that are required, or some other instrumentation. And then you have everyday reading. So you have many data points. You can shorten the clinical study population because you have more data points, which can change all the statistics. It didn't happen yet. It started to happen. The FDA is open for new tools to have online monitoring of patients, which will change the number of patients that are required for clinical study, which will change all the industry. So reimbursement, clinical study cost by having more follow-up or electronic follow-up and large databases will change the world.
We're also using digital technologies, as you can imagine, both in Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, digital technologies are becoming very sophisticated, and this gives a new level of granularity, sophistication to the studies. We gain so much more data, and that will move us towards personalization, towards identifying to take the efficacy from 50% to 90%, and then it's a different ballgame. Also in our study in age-related macular degeneration, we are looking at multiple measures. We are looking at visual acuity as a primary endpoint, but then we are looking at a number of additional measures that tell us something, teach us about the human mechanism of action, which is very, very important, and that's really what drives us then towards the next designs, the designing phase 3 studies.
Great. It's almost as if you have looked at some of my questions in advance. You mentioned FDA and its acceptance of digital technologies and endpoints. We are at an amazing time for regulatory innovation, particularly in the US. FDA, it seems, is releasing new guidance documents weekly. And the question is, and we're also seeing, we're seeing the emergence of China and the regulatory changes that are happening there to make that market more open to innovative drugs. We're seeing some changes at EMA. We're seeing, regenerative medicine pathways in Japan. And so I'm just kind of wondering how you can do drug development in a world that's quickly changing. And for, I would think, these changes at FDA are largely positive, but I just kind of want to get your guys' perspective on what you think of this pace of regulatory innovation and maybe what more you'd like to see. So, go ahead.
The one thing I was going to say is, in the gene therapy field is certainly evolving fast. Yeah. And in a way, you sort of partner with the regulators because to some extent, together, you're pioneering the route to a regulatory approval. And there is a constant, reevaluation of, say, the sort of quality standards and requirements, comparability work that needs to be done. And that, helps if you, let's say, have a breakthrough designation to have a very open and regular dialogue. And the other thing to recognize is, I think, say, Europe and US, EMA and FDA probably have, I think, every other month sort of meetings to share insight. So that I think it's not just a sort of a regional discussion, it's sort of globalizing as to how do you manage a sort of new wave of medicine coming through and think about the quality and regulatory standards that are required. So trying to be part of that dialogue and contribute ideas to it and proposals, I think is helpful.
Yeah. And I'm now approaching my 30th year in this industry, and I think there are two major things that have changed. Number one, dialogue. I think the agencies actively drive a strategy of allowing dialogue, interactive exchanges. Things like fast-track designations, things like priority vouchers to incentivize certain approaches. There are many examples for how the agencies drive this kind of and encourage us to have this dialogue, and this is a major change to what it was years ago. And so basically it helps us to get better, but it also helps the agency to understand industry and developers better and to see ways to potentially improve certain ways to market access. The other point you mentioned briefly is the alignment across the major regulatory agencies. I've spent my entire life in vaccines, which is very different to all of your areas because we are dealing not with patients, we are dealing with healthy people. Because we are talking about prevention rather than therapy. And there are certain barriers that are significantly higher for dealing with healthy individuals. And here, we have been faced with a big issue over the years that the agencies took very different stance, and developing a product, in this case a vaccine for global launch, was basically a mission impossible because the standards were entirely different. And this alignment for me is the second major topic besides dialogue that is helping us all together to bring innovative medicines faster and more efficient to market.
I think that the dialogue that have been mentioned here is very important, because the FDA and other agencies have plans when to release new guidelines, when to change regulatory approaches. For example, for aging, the FDA declared that about a year from now, they will issue guidelines, what should be the endpoint of an aging study. Now, you know it, so better not to start before you know the endpoint, otherwise you are spending your money. In our case, in CLI, critical limb ischemia, in the past, the only endpoint that was accepted by Europe and US was amputation-free survival in the end of 1 year after treatment. We knew that the change may happen, and time to amputation or death will be accepted by both agencies. So we waited about a year until the time that we have seen that the two agencies, FDA and EMA, will agree to the new endpoint, and we have been approved to do a single pivotal study in Europe and US, same patient, same endpoint. So we saved a lot of money in the design of the phase 3 due to the fact that we knew that something is going to be changed. Because we have been approved before by the European, and we wanted to have one pivotal study in US and Europe to save the number of patients that should be enrolled in those potential two studies. So listen to them. They declare usually what they intend to do. In Europe, you have many plans, and they give you the annual plans, and you have a follow-up. Everything is open. You just have to listen, to talk to them, to listen, and to make changes in your strategy based on the regulatory changes.
I think, you made the point that, one should consider the FDA as a partner or the regulators as partners rather than enemies. Often you meet companies who fear an upcoming FDA meeting. I think that especially when you're breaking new ground into an area like, age-related diseases, in our case, but also, in the diseases that we have been discussing, I think it's extremely important. Those people are also scientists. They think scientifically, medically, clinically, and if you work with them in a harmonized manner, I think then you will be able to define endpoints. I've been in the industry now 35 years, and I've seen also many instances where companies define new endpoints, new approvable endpoints that actually had not existed before. So I think the regulators are definitely open-minded, and also I think you made the point that patient advocacy groups, foundations that are dedicated to certain diseases are also important partners in all of this. Who will speak for you, who will partner with you, and I think this is a very important element, to work towards this. And very refreshingly, actually, today, the FDA, you have written about this, BioCentury published on this, this is very refreshing to see the new style and the new mentality of the FDA, which is very positive.
And look, the regulators need help on this. When there are new therapies and there's new endpoints discussed, they need our help because we think about this every day. And so that sort of dialogue is important, not just on a drug-by-drug basis, but a broader basis, when establishing these, when looking at new diseases or new endpoints. We went through this with NASH over the last several years. We've gone through this with hepatitis B over the last several years. And so to have a seat at that table is important.
Yeah, an interesting example is, at the end of last year, we had a meeting with EMA, which was much more of a horizon scanning, sort of strategic portfolio discussion than it was about any one individual program, because they want to get ahead of the game and understand, what are the common issues that we're going to have to deal with as you bring in a new modality, not just for this first, program that we're looking to get approved, but for the one after and the one after that, because there's a sort of there are some issues that over time, they'll be able to sort of harmonize around and give us better guidance around by, sharing data with each other.
Great. And so I wonder, you know, as we sort of think about the regulatory innovation, I did mention China. We've talked a lot about FDA, but I'm just sort of curious if China is all on anyone's radar and they're watching that for the changes and the pace of innovation. It's just, yeah, anyone.
We're at the beginning of looking at that. I mean, we want to go global, and certainly, actually, a lot of people have brought China to our attention, but I would say we have a lot of diligence still to do.
China is definitely coming up, and I serve as an advisor at a China-based investment fund, and I just recently attended 2 meetings. In fact, one of them was the BioCentury China Summit, and the other one was a partnership meeting, and we invited FDA experts to the meeting. And you know, the CFDA is now fully harmonizing with the FDA, and the intent is extremely positive. I think they will be at world class, you know, very quickly. I am absolutely certain and convinced, you know, they have competent people, they have, you know, sophisticated employees who either moved back from the US and who are now running the organization, but I am very, very optimistic. And this also applies to their IP culture, you know, which used to be dreadful. You know, many companies didn't go to China because of the threat of IP. And I think that's also now reached a point where people feel comfortable about the IP protection there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of positive noise coming out of the regulatory process on IP, and I think the other part of that is what the business model is to go into China, and I think we also need to understand that well. You know, to what extent you have to joint venture with a local company, how, you know, do you have to use your know-how with a local company in order to participate in the market? And so there are various elements that I think we just want to understand well, so as to make a right decision.
One should understand, no doubt, because they're different in the way they think and so on. In our case, the good news that they accept the multifactorial approach. In the Eastern medicine, they usually use more than one factor. They do not live with the modality that you have to have one agonist that will improve the situation of the patient. So naturally, they think that the treatment should be a multifactorial, taking into consideration a variety of aspects. So theoretically, the cell therapy that we offer raise a lot of interest because they say, okay, that's a solution. We have been using placentas for we purify ourselves from placenta after birth. So they've been eating placentas, they've been doing a lot of stuff with placentas, and suddenly we came with our solution and said, wow, naturally we think you're right, because that's the way we believed in our culture, that one should use multifactorial treatment. So I think they're open, and I may guess that because of that, we may see a lot of development in the Far East, China, Japan, Korea, in the cell therapy space, because they like the modalities. It's not like the Western companies, they want to see what is the agonist, what is the strict mechanism of action, and show me what is the exact amplification of agonist A, B, or C. So they are more holistic, and I think it will change the way they accept cell therapy.
And we have a Chinese partner. We are actively working on a technology platform with a Chinese company. I set up a Chinese operations for a big pharma company I worked for before. I'm not yet convinced. I'm not yet convinced because I am convinced technically, I'm convinced scientifically. I'm not convinced when it comes to business ethics and compliance standards according to what we think is right or wrong, okay? Because I see it every day. I see that there are, you know, I wouldn't put my name under the IP situation is solved and IP handling is solved. And clearly when it comes to quality compliance standards, and you mentioned manufacturing a couple of times today, I have very good evidences on the quality compliance standard in manufacturing in China right now, in our industry, meaning vaccines in this particular case. And I think there are still significant differences. And I think the barriers to reach, I would say, an alignment in terms of standards, which for me is the prerequisite to, at a certain point in time, have a real global market, is still a couple of years away.
Yeah, but it's getting there. Yeah.
It's getting there, yes.
Yeah.
It's getting there.
Yeah. And so as someone mentioned talent earlier, and obviously China's growing market attracts some talent back to that region, but we also have a talent challenge here. We're raising new companies are being formed, heads of R&D are leaving to start these new companies, and there is a need to continue some continuity to build those teams that can attract that investment and can attract those partners. I'm just sort of wondering how you're all thinking about, attracting and keeping talent in this very dynamic environment. So.
Yeah, I think the result of the company is just a sum of the energy and the efforts that employees stick into the programs that are being developed. So talent is the people in the company are a key asset to the success of a company. We're headquartered in the Netherlands, which has some significant advantages. It's about 1/3 of the cost to operate a business compared to Cambridge or the West Coast. We have access to a lot of science and scientists that are not heavily fought for by other companies. On the flip side, we have very little pharmaceutical companies in the Netherlands, and therefore there's very little talent that comes to from an orphan disease perspective and a international regulatory perspective, clinical operations perspective. So we decided at a certain point to open an office in the US just to give ourselves access to the type of talent that we need to get our drugs approved eventually. And that creates a pretty interesting dynamic in the company because there's very different cultures between Europe, or at least the Netherlands, and the US, and making that work with the differences and the common mission. So we always look where in the world we can get that talent and try to accumulate it in those two locations. And then holding on to that talent is key. So designing a company and a structure and a culture that allows people to stay and commit for the longer term to the mission of the company, I think is key.
Yeah, I mean, I'd pick up on that by using that word culture again. I think that when you're establishing a new company, it's extremely important, I think, right from the beginning to decide what kind of culture you want and to have a united leadership team that sort of, along with the employee base as it grows, sort of makes that live and actually works with the employees in a way to define what that culture is that you want in the company, and then to keep hiring people that fit with that culture. And so, that was one of my top priorities in the first 3 months of joining Orchard, which was to work to really make that explicit. Because if you get that foundation right, I think you can then create a wonderful environment, and that will keep people with the company. And we have the same issue of, we have a London office, we have a Boston office, and a Menlo Park office with leadership in all three. So the executive leadership team actually is dispersed geographically, which I think is an asset because it's not everybody concentrated in one location. And if you want to go global, I think that's helpful. But it requires a lot of work to make sure that there's an aligned view of the kind of company that we want to build.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. It is very competitive. I mean, we've doubled our team, and I've expanded the executive team and continue to do so. And it's very competitive. And I think it comes back to what is culture, but also value, and strategically where, how do the culture and the value, how does that align with strategically where we're going? Executives don't want to come to a single asset company. Obviously, it's too binary. And we're not going to raise the kind of capital that we need to raise with a single asset company. But I think it's investors invest in teams, and I think that's the operative word. There's no I, it's a team, it's we. And I think it's getting that right mix of talent and synergy. You want some overlap, but you want skill sets that can advance the company in the direction that we're going. But it's been a challenge. We're in Cambridge, and we have one office. So it has been a challenge, but we have been successful, and we continue. And I think it really speaks to strategically where we're going and the culture that we have and the team that now it's the team that will bring the new talent in as well. It's not one person. So I count the board as part of that team as well.
Chris?
Yeah, everyone would agree that attracting and retaining talent is the most important thing that we do, certainly. And it's been my experience that compensation is a negative incentive. It's not a positive incentive. In other words, if somebody is compensated poorly, they're upset and frustrated. If they're compensated well, they're happy for a day, but then they move on. And so the way to really retain talent is to give them a mission. Give them something that's exciting, and give them a reason to go to work every day, and then to give them resources. What we tell our people is, look, it's my job to make sure you've got all the resources you need. And so if you need something, tell me. And so if you fail, it's because scientifically we couldn't accomplish this, or because we couldn't figure a way around this. It's not because you didn't have the resources. And if you give somebody that, it's a dream job, right? This is now a test of your intellect. And that sort of culture, I think, allows you to bring in really smart people and motivated people and let them just do crazy things.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we also have one location. We are located here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So clearly this is a very competitive environment. I think, I agree with everything you said. But I would also get back to that foundational science. I think, the quality of your concepts, of your scientific platform, of the ideas, I think those will be the motivating factors for people, and then, empowering them with the right tools. The Bay Area, I started out 36 years ago at Genentech, and so I witnessed that kind of excitement which existed when the company was 300 people, and it was a fantastic feeling, to have that sense of creativity, innovation, almost invincibility. We could do anything, and I think that culture still exists here. I feel it. I see it. And that's kind of, the culture that we have been creating and maintaining and nurturing. And, of course, you have to have the tools for that. You have to have the means, the occasional, we have a fun committee. And so you have to maintain that sort of, playfulness. And so I think so far we've been very fortunate, but I have to say that we do feel the pressure. We feel the competition. So.
And I think it's also important to continuously remind people what we're doing and why we're doing that. It's so easy to get focused on the minutia of your job. One of the things that we've just started to do is to bring in patients in various areas that we're going after to talk to our people, and so they have a face on this disease that is that they may know a lot about but don't know the personality of, right? And it's important to allow them to it gives them a tangible thing to focus on. I'm working on this every day to help this person or help this group of people.
Probably one comment about talent. I divide the talent between marketing talent, technology talent, and so-called manufacturing talent. If you design the product properly, you can avoid some of them. We are in the allogeneic space. Other companies are in the autologous space. In the autologous space, you have to have manufacturing expertise in each site, where you collect the samples from the patient, you do whatever you do, the ex vivo manipulation, and inject it back. So you have to have many talents around the globe in order to do the treatment. In our case, we have central manufacturing. We'll have a few facilities in the future. The product is ready to use. No manipulation near the patient bed, just simple thawing and injection. So I think it's important to design the product in a way that you will avoid the need for special talent to treat the patient with your product. Make it automated, make it simple to use, and so on.
And I just want to ask, because I believe, Daniel, you're not our typical, your background is IT, is that correct? So that's not typical of the biotech CEO. And as we talk about talent, we talked about digital technologies, and are there new people we need to bring into the ecosystem, and how challenging will that be, particularly in IT, if that is your answer, because you're competing with, very well-funded, better funded than some biotech tech companies.
Well, I think it's really refreshing to have a different perspective in healthcare. At least for me, and other people share that in the company. That it helps us to look at things a different way. Obviously, with my background, we're looking a lot into digital and what we can do with big data and clinical data accumulation through devices and eventually in real-world data collection. And for that, of course, we do need people that come from IT, and therefore you don't compete with Novartis or Roche, but you compete with Facebook or Google. I think, though, that to your point, there is a significant difference in the mission that drives people to do this work. You can either make the next app for whatever kind of function, or you can do something to really improve people's lives. And I think that is across the board, irrespective of the industry, of what industry you're in. And that is a very important motivator for people to actually make an impact with the work that you do on a daily basis. So, yeah, I think it is helpful to have different views in the company.
But I think, every company needs to build up AI, machine learning, data management, the sophistication that's not coming, but it's already here. And I think it will be part of the future of healthcare, at every level, from discovery, from target selection and identification through patient stratification and, measuring and monitoring efficacy. I think this is here. What I find fascinating, actually, is that that there is a next generation of doctors coming along who will speak this language. This is not quite there yet. I think doctors still prefer, the traditional endpoints, but this is coming, and it's part of the evolution of the industry.
I think what's interesting, though, is the common theme here is a lot of us are building. And you're building from an earlier stage. And so when we talk about talent, it's not just technical talent. It's ability to work within ambiguity of a build. Because this is you want people who like wearing multiple hats, and as you say, they may be very purpose-driven, and they also want to make a difference. And so you sort of need a particular subpopulation of talent that is not just technically competent, but is actually a thriver in the environment where it's not all in place, and actually you have to build it and put it in place.
So I think that entrepreneurial spirit is really the foundation of what anybody in biotech, what we're building. It's building on the ambiguity, but also a common cause and making a difference. And I think, and being able to wear the multiple hats, and that's not for everyone.
Absolutely.
But you need some people in your company that don't need that as well. So it's that diversity of talent that you need based on the role they play. And I think that's, I'm a believer that bringing people in that are unlike. I mean, you don't want everyone to be the same, or you're not going to grow.
Right.
So I think coming from different industries is fantastic. And I think the whole AI space, IT, that's integral to what we all are going to be doing in the future. So I think it's an exciting time for biotech and the industry, just because of this convergence of talent from many different industries.
And you mentioned bringing patients in, and I've heard that over the years from biotech CEOs and even some pharma CEOs. And I'm just wondering, who else here does this or has thought about doing it?
Definitely.
Yeah, we do.
We have some working.
We do it a lot indeed. We actually employ a patient that's suffering from one of the diseases that we work on. So he's there every day in the company, so people know literally why they do the work that they do on a daily basis. I think it's very important because it's embodies the mission that we're on, and it gives people really a reason to get out of bed in the morning and to work really hard to go above and beyond to get the work done.
We do also.
And also, to remind people, that because of everything that we're doing, there may be thousands or maybe millions of people walking around who would not otherwise walk around, and that's a hell of a thing. That's a real gift to be part of that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the similar situation, the patient who's in our office every day, what we're trying to do, our mission is to do for that patient and that community what was not possible for that patient. Right? So they are on the best care that they could get today. What we could do is take them to a completely different level. So it is a very important stimulus, I think, for the company. It's also slightly risky in a sense because, you know, it's a tricky, but I think overall very positive thing to do. And I think all hands calls, for example, with patients and families talking about the impact of a disease on their life, the burden of the disease, the difference it would make to change their lives. It's a huge stimulus for everybody.
I think that's a good point. It's not just the patient, it's the families. It extends way beyond individual lives. It's society. And I think it's an honor that we have the opportunity to develop these drugs. I think it's a responsibility we have. And I think anybody that's on the team has to take what we're doing very seriously, that this is a responsibility, not just to give return to capital, but it is to change the lives of the patients that our products are serving. And it's an honor to be part of that. We're fortunate, blessed.
And are you learning from the patients in terms of how you design your trials, perhaps, or how you look for new targets or new endpoints or new diseases?
Absolutely. So we had our patients actually even help with the education on the informed consent. So getting them involved, with the protocol design, it's different because in a phase 2, you're obviously, it's very regulated and you need to make sure you meet your endpoint, and it's not, maybe in phase 3 it's different because it's more real life, and I think that's where they're part of all of our discussions and educating the patients that we're recruiting. That's where we really leverage and work with the patient groups.
We also had a patient who participated actually in one of our studies, a phase 2A study. It was an open label study, and he, a Parkinson's patient, so he signed on as a patient advocate with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and now he's evangelizing. He claims that he felt better. Of course, one takes this with a grain of salt, but he is now evangelizing the treatments that we are pursuing, and that's actually a very positive thing. And indeed, through the internet, I think it's also fascinating, to see that there are patient groups who exchange ideas. There are blogs, where they actually exchange, okay, I participated in this therapy, you should also do. And so this is also a very impressive vehicle for us, I think.
And has anyone learned anything new, like surprising from the patients or the caregivers that they've
Well, I mean, the other area is if you're bringing a therapy to the world that has a significant effect size, you may not need to do a placebo-controlled study.
Right.
And so patient registries are very key. Natural history documentation is very key. So working with patient organizations early to try and elaborate in a more scientific way, what is the normal natural history of this condition is actually a win for everybody because it allows you to go faster ultimately.
Great. Well, I think we've had a really fruitful discussion. I want to learn how to get on your fun committee, or at least come to one of their meetings. I'm that much fun. But I just want to thank everyone again for participating, and I really appreciate the input, and I hope that you found it valuable as well.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.